I did not become Charleston's scandal by pressing linen to a mirror's shine. I earned my infamy by what I boiled away in a copper tub. The laundry house crouched behind the Blackwood mansion like punishment, with a roof, chimney, spitting steam, rafters sweating lye, floorboards warm from the fire, even at dawn. For 18 years that room ate my mornings, my skin, and the easy part of breathing. My name is Eliza. I was the Blackwood laundress, and in the summer of each Enslaved, I traded the safety of obedience for the danger of a decision. Not for the whites I turned bluer than blue or the sheets I soldiered flat, but for what I did to Mistress Cordelia Blackwood inside the same copper where I laid my youth to scald. Charleston's summers smother, air so wet it presses a hand against your mouth, mosquitoes whining like needles. Even overseers halted at my threshold when the tubs rolled near boiling. But I learned to live where steam burns and silence keeps you living longer than clever talk. Fabric taught me that bodies confess. Hands taught me that stories leave marks. Mine cracked and lie-scored until they were no longer a girl's hands at all. Only tools, steady enough to hold a lid against a screaming world. You every day began the same. Kindle the fire, pump the well, drag barrels, stir soap to a slick sheen. Set irons by the coals to heat like small suns. I worked until the room shivered with heat, and I forgot the taste of air without salt. People admired the Blackwood's linen. How white, how starched, how fine, and never asked the price laid down in other people's skin. I was born on the Blackwood plantation in Ichinchi by Josh's Tea. My mother worked in the big house. My first memory is the underside of a table, chair legs like little trees, her bucket of rinse water sliding across the floor, her humming low as prayer as she scrubbed. When I was 8, fever took her quick and quiet. The house didn't pause. A chair scraped back in the kitchen, and the room felt bigger where she used to be. Cordelia had newly married Master James then. She measured me the way you measure fabric. The girl's hands are small enough for stains, she told the housekeeper, then lower, and her color won't show so much in the wash house. I was light enough that callers sometimes mistook me for a sun-browned white servant until they looked longer and remembered what world they lived in. They buried my mother behind the quarters, a wooden marker that the first storm unspoke. I learned that grief has chores. You still draw water. You still fold sheets. You still say yes, ma'am, when your mouth wants to howl. Later, I learned what everyone already knew. My father was Master James's older brother, Henry, who came down from Virginia to count bales and collect whatever else the law said might belong to him. No one said the word for what he took. They did not need to. The proof lived in my face. Blackwood eyes, Blackwood nose. Cordelia read that proof every time she looked at me, and she tasted it like bitterness. The laundry stood apart from the house because fire needs room. Steam must scald where plaster won't peel. I learned to breathe there. Learned how collars hold secrets and cuffs confess at the edges. Cordelia inspected daily, laying garments flat like witnesses. She lifted them to the light and tried them for sins. I was 9 when she struck me the first time. A tea stain smaller than a fingernail marked her lace handkerchief. "Do you know what this cost?" she asked, voice gentle as a blade. Her palm landed before I could answer. That night supper was denied. At sunrise, Ruth, old laundress then, showed me tannin lifting again, while Cordelia watched like my failure amused her. Cruelty, I discovered, ages into a habit. It wears perfume and calls itself standards. Ruth trained me with the blunt mercy of truth. Her fingers had begun to curl with work. Her eyes could still see every flaw. "Keep your head down, mouth shut," she said. "1 spot earns the switch. 2, the whip." She taught stains like scripture. Grease wants hot water and patience. Blood demands cold first, always. Rouge tattles on collars. Bourbon lives on waistcoats after late nights. Children's sheets tell the truth. Their mothers pretend not to know. I learned fabrics by touch. lawn that sighs, muslin that drinks light, silk that asks for a whisper. I learned to make a garment forget what it had witnessed. Ink by 14. Ruth was sold away, her hands too stiff for fine work. I opened the door of the laundry house alone each dawn and docked. Stepped into the heat like stepping into a sentence already begun. The city whispered its sins through my tubs. I scrubbed them invisible and learned to be invisible too. Imaged prompt V, sepia-toned Enslaved censor's photograph. Elderly, black laundress with gnarled hands guiding a young laundress at a wash table. Bolts of linen, flat irons by the hearth, steam haze, wet plate collodion look, authentic lens aberrations, soft vignette. Cordelia made a courtroom out of my tables. She arranged gowns and shirts with a prosecutor's patience, smoothed seams as if silencing witnesses, lifted hems to the window, light to expose what daylight might confess. She never hurried judgment. She preferred precision to speed, cruelty to indifference. Her voice could cut cloth. No, she counted my mistakes the way a banker counts coins. She told me which ones were forgivable and which ones meant hunger. A button sewn half a breath off, true. A cuff not creased sharply enough to draw blood. A sheet whose corner dared to billow when it should have lain like ice. Order, she would say, meaning perfection, meaning submission. And if she found an offense, her eyes did not flash. They cooled. I learned her rhythms. She inspected after luncheon, when the sun struck the high window and made the washhouse glow like an oven. She walked clockwise around the sorting table, then counterclockwise, the way a person checks that a lock is really turned. She ended with my hands. Hold them up, she would command, to see if the day had punished me enough. On her behalf. Red knuckles pleased her, soft skin made her suspicious. Ruth had told me once not to hate. Hate is a second job, she said, and the first one already breaks you. I tried to believe her. I put my anger in the same drawer as my needle and took it out, only when repair was required. But some days, when Cordelia pressed a crease with her fingertip and found it brave enough to spring back, I could feel a seam giving way inside me. Linen remembers, cotton remembers more, silk remembers in whispers. I learned to read those memories and then to erase them until even not. The owners could not tell what their garments had been through. Blood must meet cold water first, the way a shock meets the body before the body decides to survive. Rouge collects at collars like a rumor. Wine blooms purple and then sulks brown. I could tell if a gentleman's hand shook at supper by the constellation of droplets on his waistcoat. I could tell which wives had wept into their sleeves. Children told their stories at night and gave me the pages. In the morning, I kept the city's confessions. I pressed them flat and starched them stiff and sent them home wearing innocence like a new skin. People bowed to each other in parlors and believed in white. I knew better. White is work. White is a decision made fresh every day, and it costs. My own body was laundry in their hands, scrubbed of softness, wrung of protest, ironed into usefulness. If the world had looked carefully, it might have seen that I shone the way a thing shines after too much heat. Master James lived mostly on paper. He loved ledgers because they never looked back at him. He walked past my door, counting profits under his breath, and steam curled his hairline as if to remind him he owned fire, but did not understand it. He saw me the way a man sees a staircase, necessary, dependable, beneath notice, unless it breaks. Cordelia saw everything and nothing. She saw lint where there was none and missed the storm standing in front of her. Her beauty never raised its voice, and that somehow made it louder. People in Charleston called her the belle of a season that was already dying. She wore French perfume and American righteousness, and liked to confuse the two. In Enslaved Charleston, when they moved to the Charleston mansion for good, the plantation fell to overseers, and the city became our horizon. The washhouse did not change. It merely learned a new wind. I learned that ships brought fabrics I had never touched before, and that sea air could turn a crease into a question. I adjusted. I always adjusted. That is what tools do when hands insist. Goops. Some evenings, I watched James from the yard as he stood on the piazza, staring at the harbor with a glass in his hand. He never looked back toward the laundry. Why would he? The house lights swallowed him. I returned to my tub. The August heat in Ichenbabai Sensorwu felt personal, like a grudge. The sky held against us. Cordelia stood at my table in a gown, the color of Dotterudrock, cream, and watched my iron travel the length of her petticoat. They say in Boston, she said, there are steam contraptions that can do the work of 3 of you. She let the sentence settle like ash, and machines don't bleed. I did not look up. No, ma'am, I said, machines don't bleed, or speech don't bleed. The iron hissed. Wolf of steam rose and vanished. She stepped closer, studying my reflection on the copper kettle, as if the metal might tell her what my face would not. Do you ever tire of this? She asked lightly, as if she did not tire me like a chain. Of course you don't, she answered herself. It is what you are made for. I kept my hands busy and my mouth empty. But something in me wrote those words down on a hidden scrap of paper and saved them for a day I did not yet know. Perhaps I should mention to Mr. Blackwood that you have become difficult, she said later, when the day's heat found even the shadows. Your sale could fund a new kitchen girl. The way she said sale made it sound like a word from a Sunday sermon instead of a map to hell. Seal meant sugar fields where men aged faster than Cain. It meant brothels that advertised light-skinned women like delicacy. It meant new names that fit like borrowed shoes and owners who tested you as if you were a rope. It meant your body turned into a number that did not include your heart. Yes, ma'am, I said, lowering my eyes as practice demanded. Inside, a hinge moved. 18 years of heat had forged my compliance into a kind of metal. Metal remembers fire. Metal, when struck, rings. That night, I lit a stub of tallow and looked at my hands. The skin was a map of small, white liburns. The nails split into half-moons. My mother had kept her hands pretty as a prayer, even when work tried to steal them. A woman's hands tell her story, she used to say. Mine told of waters lifted and weights carried, and something about to change its shape. The razor slept under a loose board. I had found it years ago in the master's trash. A blade, no longer good enough for his chin, but still sharp enough for my skin. Sometimes I held it across my palm until a red line whispered up. Not to hurt, but to remember. Edges exist. They wait. That razor was my secret hymn, proof that tools meant for men could serve other purposes, when hands chose. Cordelia never imagined I had sharpness hidden under her feet. To her, I was cloth, bleachable, ringeable, replaceable. But cloth burns if you press it too long. Cloth tears if you tug. One time too many. That razor hummed in the dark like a reminder that cloth has limits. By mid-August, the city itself seemed to steam. Mosquitoes thick as soot. Water in the tub already hot, before the fire touched it. Cordelia came that afternoon with her perfume sharpened, her nerves jangling. She found fault with everything. Sheets that glowed white as stars, napkins stiff as bone, even a gown I had mended to invisibility. Perhaps you mean to embarrass me before Henry arrives, she hissed. Her eyes jittered like glass black to gaunt crack about to crack. You, she raged. But her words only floated on the heavier silence in me. 18 years had stoked it. That day it boiled. When she leaned over the tub to scold a sheet, I moved, I pushed. Her scream ripped the air, then drowned under the lid I dropped across her shoulders. Steam met flesh. Flesh fought water. The sound was animal, and it lived in me long after she stopped moving. I did not speak except one sentence. 18 years. I pressed my weight until her body stilled. Then I cleaned. The floor, the droplets, the splashes, every trace like any other stain. For years I had erased Charleston's evidence. Now I erased hers. The water boiled louder after her silence. Flesh became something else in the copper's throat. I fed the fire until the lid rattled. I had learned stain removal too well. Now, I turned that knowledge upon a body. No witness remained except my hands, and even they smelled of soap when I scrubbed them raw. Maria knocked at dusk. "Mistress missing," she whispered. I lied without rehearsal. She came. She left. She changed her dress. Lies felt like starch. At first stiff, then natural. I folded them the way I folded sheets. Smooth, square, believable. No? When James came with men and lanterns, he looked at me as though I were part of the furniture. "If she returns here, send word." I bowed my head over the ironing board. Obedient. Ordinary. Invisible. No one thought to lift the lid. Henry was not his brother. He looked at people the way surveyors look at land, measuring usefulness, noticing detail. He came alone to the wash house the next day. "You were the last to see her," he said, closing the door like a verdict. He asked questions: when, how, what words? I answered as I had rehearsed, eyes lowered, but his eyes roved the room. They lingered on the tub, on the drain. "Where does the water go?" he asked. My heart thumped like irons falling. "Out to the creek, sir," I said. He nodded, but not in satisfaction. Before he left, he placed a silver dollar on the table. Payment for truth, or test for lies. It gleamed like a drop of moonlight on rough wood. I added it to my hidden treasures. Blood money spends the same as any. The house hunted Cordelia for days. Pond dragged, wells searched, neighbors questioned. No trace. Some said she fled nerves. Some whispered abduction. Only Henry spoke murder. But he did not point at me. Not yet. I worked through the storm. I scrubbed, I pressed, I folded. Routine is armor. Routine is alibi. When eyes lingered, I bent lower. When silence stretched, I filled it with work. People forget what blends into background. And I had spent 18 years practicing invisibility. At night, I dreamt steam lifting her face, blurred and melted, yet still speaking my name. I woke with sheets tangled around me like bindings, but dawn always came. Fire always needed feeding. Work is relentless. So is memory. The household kept his heart in drawers. Deeds, bills of sale, permission slips, ink on paper that turned people into property. Journeys into allowances. One evening, while delivering linens, I found the study door ajar. James had left his order of documents scattered like a deck of cards. Among them, my own bill of sale dated 18 years past, listing me like a calf with teeth checked, but also blank travel permits awaiting only his signature. I traced his handwriting by candlelight, the loops, the haughty tilt of the J. My hand shook as I copied it onto one form, naming myself bearer of a chore, to Savannah to acquire laundry supplies. The lie fit so neatly it seemed true. When the ink dried, I hid the paper against my breast. It beat with me. It was the first paper that carried me forward. Instead of weighing me down, I worked harder that last day than in any of the 18 years before. I pressed every seam like scripture, starched every cuff into armor. If anyone watched, they would see only obedience, not intention. But inside, each motion counted down. Iron to board, one less hour. Soap to fabric, one step closer. Folding napkins, one breath between bondage and flight. Every knock startled me. Every glance felt like suspicion, but no one noticed. The chaos of Cordelia's absence muffled everything. James wandered rooms, muttering. Henry organized search parties. The house slaves traded rumors like handkerchiefs. No one looked twice at the laundress. That was my shield, being unseen. In that evening I packed my treasures, the ribbon, the wooden bird, the razor, the silver dollar, and now the forged paper. I wrapped them in a cloth like swaddling, as if carrying a newborn. In a way, I was It was myself, born late, but still alive. I did not sleep. I sat on the edge of my pallet and listened to the house settle, to footsteps thin out, to roosters choke in their throats. Midnight passed, 1 o'clock, 2. By 3, the estate lay drowned in silence. The tub loomed, its copper belly catching scraps of moonlight. I laid a hand on it once more. "Goodbye, mistress," I whispered. The tub had held my prison and my rebellion both. It would hold its silence now. I rose, took my bundle, tucked the forged paper into my bodice, and opened the door. The night air kissed me cold, so different from the steam I had breathed for nearly 4 decades. Above me, stars spilled like flour on black cloth. Each step away from the washhouse felt like pressing a crease into a new life. Fragile, but mine. The estate breathed like a sleeping animal. I crossed the yard in a curve that kept me out of sight lines. Behind the kitchen garden, along the shadow of the smokehouse, past the fig tree that dropped sugar soft fruit into the grass. The guard dog lifted its head and recognized my steps. I had fed it scraps for a year without naming it. It sighed and lowered its muzzle to its paws. The gate hinge groaned. I pressed it steady with my hip so the sound folded back into the night. The road to town was a ribbon the moon had almost forgotten. I kept to the ditch when lanterns swung and to the hedgerow when voices drifted. I moved the way steam moves, everywhere and nowhere, low, quiet, persistent. The marsh to my right hissed with life. The live oaks to my left wore Spanish moss like old thoughts. Far ahead, masts made a thin forest against the stars, the harbor a darker dark beyond the rooftops. At a crossroads, a patrol checked papers with the slow pride of men who like to be obeyed. I crouched behind a fallen log and held my breath so long I could hear my heartbeat knock like a fist. A woman argued that her pass was in order. One man said she sounded too sure. Another said let her go, sleep was waiting. The lantern turned. The road widened around its circle of light, then narrowed again when they moved on. I crossed the road, a shadow, then a person again on the other side. The second patrol came without lanterns. I heard boot leather first, a rhythm out of place with the insects, and slid beneath a broken fence rail where weeds had grown into a soft net. 2 men halted 10 paces away, close enough that I could smell tobacco sweetening their breaths. One said he had a cousin in the city who worked in a counting house. The other said he liked the river because it told the truth about weight. They relieved themselves into the ditch that hid me and never looked down. When they left, the weeds unstitched themselves from my dress, and I crawled forward on elbows and knees, my bundle like a beating heart under my throat. Distance is made of inches when fear irons you flat. Near town, the air changed. Tar, fish, rope, stale beer. Feet on cobbles, wheels striking iron. I pulled my shawl close and walked with the tired gait of a woman who belonged to work. To be invisible among strangers, choose the shape of their expectations and wear it like a cloak. Dock hands cursed softly. A boy slept on a bollard with his mouth open to the moon. I counted ships the way a child counts wishes and chose the one with a name I would not remember. Later, because memory can be a noose. You at the gangplank, a man with a lantern said, "Papers?" I handed over James Blackwood's borrowed hand. "Savannah," he read. "Laundry supplies." He studied my face long enough to make me feel stitched to the moment, then nodded without liking it. He had the look of someone who suspects the world of tricks, but prefers not to chase them at midnight. "Below," he said, "you travel cheap, you ride with barrels." In the hold, the dark tasted of oak and salt and old cargo. Before boarding, I watched a man chalk a crude manifest on a barrel head. He wrote numbers as if they might argue with him, and then underlined them to end the conversation. A woman with a basket of crabs bargained with a mate until both of North them laughed from the same side of a joke I did not hear. A preacher touched 3 sailors on the shoulder and left a blessing behind like a small burden. 2 shrugged it off, and 1 kept it. The world was busy deciding itself, and none of it required my name. I sat on a coil of rope, tucked my bundle under my knees, and counted my breaths until the counting lost numbers and became a kind of prayer. When the boat moved, the water's push felt like a hand between my shoulder blades. I kept my eyes open until fear bored of me. Dawn came as gray as lie. The city retreated until it was only a smear. I did not look back. When we put in at a muddy landing to take on barrels, I stepped onto the planks to stretch my legs. The sky wore a thin milk of morning. Men argued with the river about whose schedule mattered. A girl, not much older than I had been when the washhouse first claimed me, sold peaches from a Daltron basket and counted wrong on purpose so she could give away the leftover sweetness to the smallest children. I bought one and ate it over the rail, juice on my chin, and for a moment the world did not have an owner. I learned the geography of fear by touch. Bark against my back, wet grass soaking my hem, the tremble of a fence rail when a wagon rolled past. I timed my breaths to hoofbeats, drew my shoulders in when laughter spilled from a doorway, and lengthened my stride when the dark felt thinner. A drunk sang a hymn with the words backward. A cat leapt from a barrel and became a scream, before it became a cat again. I walked through all of it like a sentence that did not end where others preferred. Twice, I thought I saw the shape of Henry's hat at the end of a street. Twice, it turned into some other man's shadow. Memory does such tricks when danger teaches it. Theater. I checked my bundle the way people check a pulse. Paper, ribbon, bird, razor, coin. I told myself their order while I walked so that I would not fall apart into pieces smaller than the things I carried. At the wharf, a group of stevedores warmed their hands over a brazier and argued about the tide. One of them tipped his cap to me, not as a dockard woman, but as someone awake at an hour that requires respect. I nodded back the way a traveler nods at another road, brief, grateful, and already moving on. Up close, the ship I chose groaned like an old animal turning in sleep. Planks creaked, ropes hummed. A gull dropped something it did not want, and stared as if I might explain myself. The lantern man scratched his jaw and yawned. "Too late or too early," he muttered, meaning both. His thumb left a black crescent on the margin of my forged pass. That mark looked like a moon learning to grow. I took it as a promise that even false papers could gather truth by use. When I reached the bottom of the gangplank, the hold took me the way night takes a secret. Completely, without asking favors. Kara, by mid-river, the city was a rumor stitched to the horizon. A deckhand with a scar under one eye came down to check the lashings. He offered me a heel of bread without asking my name. I offered him silence without asking his. We shared both like a bargain. Above us the timbers spoke in their sleep. I counted the creeks like miles. I thought of the tubs back in Charleston, how the water rolled heavy at the brink of boil, how I had learned to judge a temperature by the shape of steam. Out here, the river had its own thermometer. The night cooled its surface to ink, the engine warmed it to breath, and somewhere between those two measures, I found a place to rest my mind. I set my palm on the rope and felt the boat's slow muscle. Movement is a mercy when staying still would kill you. Charleston made a story the way a hive makes honey, busy, relentless, sweet to the wrong tongues. By the time the boat brushed a new shoreline, my absence had already learned to walk without me. James interviewed the air and received no answer. Henry followed footprints that the sun erased. Maria kept her voice low and her eyes on her work. But I know she turned her face to the east more often than before, as if a message might return on the light. In Savannah, I left the boat with my bundle small as a bird and my forged permission beating like a second pulse. I did not buy laundry supplies. I bought a hat that cast a shadow and a new kerchief and bread still singing from the oven. I traded the silver dollar for passage inland and then again for a ride north where questions thinned. In a wagon crowded with baskets and gossip, a woman held her baby and told me, not asking, that I had seen too much hot water I told her I had learned what heat can teach and what it can take. Travel eats names and returns people with different mouths. Between towns, I practiced speaking without Charleston in my vowels. I traded stories like stitches, a little of mine, a thread of someone else's, enough to hold for a few miles. In one wagon, an old man told me he had been free for 10 years, and still woke at dawn to ask permission from nobody. He laughed without teeth and patted my bundle as if it were a grandchild. "Carry light," he said. "Carry true." Philadelphia smelled of coal and hope and horses. I found a room under a roof that slanted like a shoulder. The window was narrow as a book's margin and lit with an honesty Charleston never needed. I put my ribbon and bird on the shelf, set the razor in the bottom of a drawer, and took in washing from women who brought sadness in paper parcels, and left with something almost like relief. I worked carefully, but not like a servant anymore. I worked like a person who charged fairly and slept without asking, "Leave." In Philadelphia, churches argued politely about heaven, while the streets argued rudely about mud. A printer sold papers that scolded and persuaded in equal measure. The washerwomen near my alley met at a pump that sang iron whenever the handle fell. We traded soap recipes like secrets, and secrets like we were trading recipes. My first customer brought a basket with a dress that smelled of coal smoke and abandon. "Do what you can," she said. I did what I could. I did more than that. I returned the dress, clean enough to forgive the day that had dirtied it, and she took it with both hands as if receiving news. I learned to say no to too little pay. No to men who believed my front step also meant my doorway. No to the version of myself that thought endurance was the same as fate. I learned to say yes in better places. Yes to a neighbor's child who wanted to carry water and kept spilling that one. Half of it because he was trying to walk like a man already. Yes to a Sunday afternoon on a bench by the river where a fiddler kept almost finding a tune and then finally found it. Some afternoons, I took my ribbon down from the shelf and wore it while I boiled shirts. The color shocked the room like a joke told by a shy person. I let it. Some evenings, I opened the drawer and let my dull razor see the light it no longer needed. "You can rest," I told it, and the words needed saying to more than the blade. Work found me because I could do it, and because women hear each other even when men pretend they cannot. A seamstress sent me a widow whose black silk shone like a new bruise. The widow never smiled and never cried, and the way she did neither told me everything. I rinsed grief from the hem and left it where it could not trip her. She paid in coins, wrapped in paper, and on the paper she wrote only "thank you" because some languages do not need verbs. A neighbor told me of a reading circle where women swapped pamphlets the way sailors swap ports. I went twice and sat in the back and mouthed the bigger words until they fit. A teacher showed me how letters lean into one another when they agree. I bought a second-hand primer that had belonged to a child who had learned quickly. And drawn flowers in the margins every time she understood something frightening. I traced those flowers when the house was quiet and copied sentences that did not flinch. Years gathered. Work turned into custom, and custom turned into a life. I marked seasons by what the river did. In spring, it hurried and made everyone late. In summer, it smelled like pennies and warmed the stones where boys dared each other to jump. In autumn, it learned to think before moving. In winter, it held itself still enough to listen. I kept a small calendar on a nail and wrote not appointments but gratitudes, a day without a burn, a customer who returned, a joke that surprised me out loud, a letter I almost wrote and decided to save as breath instead. Some nights, the copper tub returned behind my eyes, the rattle of its lid, the scream that began as hers and ended as mine. I woke with the taste of steam on my tongue and the ache of old muscles trying to remember terror. I would move to the window and open it, a finger's width dot, and let the cold square of night press against my face. "You chose," I would tell myself. You chose when no one else would choose for you. The words did not absolve me. They arranged me, the way folding a sheet does not whiten it, but gives it a place to lie until morning. Word travels, even where it is not invited. Some said a Charleston lady had vanished between the laundry house and her dressing table. Some said a laundress had gone missing the same week, light as a whisper, quick as hot water. In taverns, men who preferred stories to facts knitted those threads into a tale with a brim that kept off the weather. Children dared each other to run past the Blackwood, wash house at night, and swore they heard a lid knock. Wives lowered their voices and wondered which of their linens had almost learned to scream. I aged away from the heat. My hands lost some hardness and found steadiness of a different kind. I kept the razor dull on purpose. I wore the ribbon in my hair once on a Sunday and put it away again, because joy, like fire, needs tending. When the war came close and then passed by, I did not open my door to it. Afterward, news arrived that men became free by a law that could be read aloud. I listened and did not cry. I had done my crying in steam where no one could see. Freedom is not a line shouted from a balcony. It is a basin filled each morning and carried without spilling. I died in Echen Babite Lukshapat, with the window open a little so the room could remember air. A woman I had taught to lift stains without bruising fabric sat beside me and held my wrist where the pulse used to clap. She would keep the work going and keep it fair. I told her to be kind, but not so kind that people mistook kindness for duty. I told her to keep the razor hidden where only courage could find it. When I left gently, like a hand leaving a sheet after smoothing it flat. And the legend? It belongs to the ones who need it. Some say I drowned myself that very night to pay a debt the world would never collect. Some say I sailed to a country where no one knew the word mistress, and bought a copper tub of my own to boil stains and not souls. Some say I walked through cities under names I liked better. Let them say. Stories are also a kind of travel pass. If you have carried this story to its end, then you know the weight of water. You know what steam can do to flesh and to fear. Remember the rooms where heat disguised itself as work, and the hands that learned to turn tools. Remember the names of the women, whose names were never written where law could see them. Remember Ruth's bent fingers teaching a girl to lift stains without lifting her eyes. Remember Mariah's whisper at a door. Remember the dog that learned mercy. Remember that a copper tub can be both altar and engine, and that a lid can be a verdict. If any part of me has walked beside you while you read, if any part of you has stood in that room and felt the lid rattle, then use it. Speak this where silence has settled like dust. Teach it where children are told only the clean parts and none of the scald. Hang it in your house like a garment turned inside out, so the seam show and the truth of how it was made cannot be denied. When you see a pair of working hands, remember they have their own scripture and their own right to rest. I did not become a story because I wanted to be told. I became a story because obedience demanded it of me until I found a way to answer back that could not be folded away. If these untold histories stir your soul, join the living archive. Subscribe, gather, argue, sing, whatever keeps breath moving through truth. Help keep the hidden loud. Help keep the boiled unforgotten. Help keep the hands that labored from being rinsed out of memory like an inconvenient stain. And if you are a person who keeps lists, add this to them: fire, water, cloth. Will they make and unmake in equal measure? Let your list end with will. If these untold histories stir your soul, keep them moving. Share them, publish them, argue them into public memory. Subscribe to nothing but the truth and the stubborn work it requires. Lend your voice where others were denied. 1. help build a record so tall and ordinary that it cannot be knocked down by anyone who finds it inconvenient. Keep this too, the sound of a lid when it stops rattling. It means the water has decided something. It means the moment has burned through its options and chosen. It means a hand held where it needed to hold, long enough to change the story, and short enough to leave one person alive to tell it. Walk gently, but do not walk small. Wash what you can, refuse what you must, and keep one clean shirt for the day you will need to stand in public and be counted. May your hands learn softness without forgetting strength, and may your story refuse erasure. Remember, too, the small mercies that build a bridge, a dog that does not bark, a neighbor who pretends not to see, a clerk who stamps a paper without reading too closely because his child kept him awake and he wants the line to move. Remember the unpretty acts that nonetheless keep the world from breaking. Lies told to mean people. Forgiveness withheld when it would only feed their hunger. If this story finds you with your hands in water, river water, let it remind you that water carries what it must. It cools, it boils, it bears witness. It does not choose sides. People do. Choose with your hands and your voice and your feet. Choose with your money and your patience. Choose early if you can, and later if you must. Choose, even when choice feels like a room with no door, because sometimes the door is only a shadow waiting for your hand. I was made into a lesson by those who needed a warning, and into a hymn by those who needed courage. I am neither. I am the sum of what heat demanded from me and what I demanded back. If you keep anything, keep the knowledge that ordinary tools, paddle, iron, pot, pen, can be turned gentle or hard by the will that holds them. Keep the knowledge that the will can change. Carry this into your rooms and halls and classrooms and kitchens. Speak the names that were not spoken when it mattered. Write the names that were not written because law preferred them unwritten. If a child asks whether the story is true, tell them the world is made of true stories and true silences, and this one refuses silence. Do not let anyone tell you that boiling is only for water. A life can boil. A town can boil. A moment can rise to the lip of a choice and roll there, shaking while the world waits to see if it will spill. If you find yourself at such a brink, take hold of the handle. Lift or lower, but make the pot answer to you. Tell this in kitchens where daughters stand on tiptoe to reach the counter. Tell it in classrooms where maps are tidy and history is not. Tell it in union halls and at bus stops and in quiet rooms where someone has put her head in her hands and forgotten she has hands at all. Tell it not to scare but to steady. Lay this story down beside others that tell what the textbooks could not fit between neat margins. Do not let comfort smooth away the burrs that make it true. If you must choose between tidy and honest, choose the one that leaves a mark.